And so my goal was to figure out how to absorb as many rounds as I could while getting as many attacks in as I could to slow down or prevent the next student from
You're actually thinking this in your head.
And a lot of my generation has these thoughts long before a shooting occurs because it's so common now. We hear about it all the time now.
So for those of us who are gun owners, it's been a tough time because, well, Colorado was turning into an anti-gun state, and I grew up and it wasn't. Dan Fenalson is with the Colorado State Shooting Association. Thanks for being with me.
Absolutely.
Appreciate
Thanks for
it.
having me.
All right. You're a survivor of a school shooting. I don't want to go through and re-traumatize you, but I'm really curious. What happened? Where?
Yeah, so I went to college up in Seattle Pacific University in Seattle, Washington. It was the end of my freshman year when I thought I was going to be a scientist, and I quickly discovered that biology and chemistry were not for me.
It took math.
Yes, it did. I switched over to economics, so I didn't have to use as much math.
I'm an economics major.
Right?
Because you can fake your way through econ.
That's right. You can argue the right answer.
You just draw some graphs and they're like, I see what you're doing. That's it.
That's right. That's right. And so it was the final test before finals. And I was in a biology lab where there was different stations of different animals that were half dissected, and that's where you answer your questions on the test. Well, all of a sudden I hear what sounded like people dropping boxes or wood outside, and I thought that was a little weird. It was a very quiet day on campus because of all the testing that was going on. And I hear the deadbolts set into place at the front of the classroom, and thought that was very odd, but maybe we were having a drill or...
deadbolts, because I'm at a time when there were no deadbolts on classroom doors. Are these automatically locked? Did the teacher go and lock them, or somebody presses a button and they lock?
My understanding is that they pressed the button and they locked.
Wow.
All I know is I heard the deadbolt, and by the time I turned around, the teacher was at the door, dropping down a shade. And so I thought, this is very weird. Teacher turned around and said, please continue taking your tests. Don't look at your phones. I said, okay. So I went back to my tests, and I started hearing sirens, and the TA came up to me and had a scalpel so that none of the other students could see it, and asked if I would stand next to the door with him because there was a threat. Didn't know if we were talking a bomb threat or somebody with a baseball bat or shooting.
Wait, let me see if I understand this. So the teacher obviously knew something was going on, closes the blinds so that whatever the threat is, we don't know what it is at this point, can't look in and see what's going on. The door is locked, and says, keep going with your test because it's a great time to be doing a test.
That's right. That's right.
And the TA obviously must know something's going on because he hands you a scalpel and asks you to help guard a door. Do I have that right?
That's exactly
Why
it.
you?
I don't know.
Dan, I don't mean to send the wrong way, but you're not the most intimidating guy I've ever seen.
I'm not, but this was Seattle. There weren't a lot of intimidating guys. And I knew this guy. We were friends. We played flag football together and some other.
This guy being
the TA.
Okay.
So I think it's because he trusted me.
Okay,
He
got
knew
it.
Who I was.
Got it.
And so I went, stood by the door, started figuring out that we're facing an active threat. That it's not something, it's not a bomb or anything. It's something that I could address with a scalpel. I had my pocket knife that I was allowed to carry on campus. It had to be under 2 inches. So I had a knife and a scalpel. And finally, one of the students finished their test and got to their phone, and she said, "We are effed," obviously, the full word there. And I knew at that point that there was something very dangerous that was happening. Figured out that it was a shooting as more students finished their tests and started talking about it in whispers. So I was sitting there next to this door with this TA, figuring out, okay, I'm bringing a knife to a gunfight, and I'm going to lose. There's no way to win that.
You're bringing a baby knife, a 2-inch knife, and a little 1-inch blade on a scalpel. And with this, if need be, you're going to defend your own life and the lives of your classmates.
I knew my life was forfeit. If that shooter chose my classroom, I knew my life was forfeit at that point. My goal, and I was thinking
what do you
this
mean?
through.
What do you mean? What were you thinking?
I was thinking, I'm saved. I know where I'm going when I die. I know Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, and I'm going to go to heaven. I didn't know if that was true for my classmates, for my teacher, for my TA. And so my goal was to figure out how to absorb as many rounds as I could while getting as many attacks in as I could to slow down or prevent the next student from...
You're actually thinking this in your head.
And a lot of my generation has these thoughts long before a shooting occurs because it's so common now. We hear about it all the time now. But what happened when I was on that campus was I was not allowed to defend myself because of the little gun-free sticker, gun-free zone sticker on the front of the school. but that didn't stop someone committed to committing murder. And so I had to sit through and think, okay, I am inadequately armed and I will lose this fight. How can I do the most damage to the shooter and save the most of my friends if that shooter chose my room? Now that shooter didn't choose my room.
Pardon me for jumping in here. You said something, many people your generation have had these thoughts before it hits the fan. Talk to me about that. What do you mean you've had these thoughts?
I mean,
I went to college, I went to school. I never thought, what would I do if a shooter came to my little Catholic school or went to the CU campus? It never registered. You grew up with this as a possibility and had drills and all the rest. So it was front of mind.
Right. I mean, we have to think through these things of how do you defend yourselves nowadays. And so I did have active shooter drills when I was in high school. I did have active shooter drills when I was in college. We practiced lockdowns. And those lockdowns were always for some unperceived threat, but we all knew what.
You all know what it was. It was for a shooter.
And I remember waking up, throughout my, waking up and looking at the news and seeing, hey, there's a shooting at this school, or there's a shooting at this college, or there's an active threat at this school. That was something that was in my normal reading patterns when I was reading the news and trying to keep informed. There was always a story about someone who was stopped from doing an active shooting or was planning on doing an active shooting. And so as someone who grew up in that time frame, you do think about that a lot. And most of my friends, when I talked to them, they said they've thought about it. They thought about what they would do, how they would defend themselves, what decisions they would make, and how do you react if that happens in your classroom.
Being of an older generation, we never talked about it. Did you and your friends growing up kind of talk about these things, or these are the things that, in my mind, you're Archie at the mulch shop, and instead of talking about Veronica, you're talking about what are you going to do if there's a shooter in our school?
I have no idea who Archie is or the mulch shop, but
God, I hate the young.
But yeah, I mean, this was something. It wasn't like a daily conversation,
Right.
but it was
But
for your
it's-
close friends. This
yeah.
is a real conversation that you have, and it's something that you have to think about when you're going through these drills. And they're again saying that it's for this threat that's perceived and not present at the moment.
They never say in case of a school shooter.
Right.
We're doing this drill in case one of the kids you go to school with goes off his rocker and starts shooting people. If somebody you know is there shooting, we're doing this drill, which seems like it would be the honest thing to tell kids. Well, we're just, I remember having fire drills. That's what we had. I think a previous generation had duck and cover drills because, an atomic bomb will not hurt you if you're under a school desk. So
Right.
they had those drills. Equally as ridiculous, I think, as the drills you have. So what happened?
So I was sitting there waiting. We start hearing tons of sirens. You could see motorcycle cops jumping the curb. Once the police were there, I felt a lot more safe, a lot more secure. It was clear the shooting wasn't in my building. The shooting wasn't in the classroom that I was in. But once we got the all clear and there was so much police presence and security presence on campus, you start counting friends. You start texting as many people as you can, as quick as you can. Are you okay? Let's all meet here. Has anyone heard from this person? Has this person been found yet? And you have this sense of joy when you see a friend after that, because you're like, okay, you're okay. But also at the same time, the dread of, but that means that somebody else isn't, and I don't know who that is. And so at the school shooting, there was a guy that was killed. He was a friend of mine. We played intramurals together. We played sports together. We ate lunch together. He was a great guy.
Was he targeted or was he just?
He was just random. And it wasn't even someone from our school that did the shooting. But one thing, I will never say the shooter's name. He doesn't deserve to be famous. His reasons for it don't deserve to be famous. He deserves to rot in prison. And that's the best that he deserves.
He is alive.
He is. Mm-hmm. And so what was really sad was, through that whole day, you just start counting faces and trying to figure out who was the one that was shot, because no one's saying anything. And then the media starts to show up, and they're putting cameras and microphones in people's faces and saying, how are you feeling right now? One of the questions I was asked was, do you think the Republicans' agenda of being pro-gun has caused this mass shooting? And I'm sitting there going, mass shooting, does that mean there's more than one victim? Like, we had no idea what was going on. And it was so unnerving and just disgusting, the way that they were trying to capitalize on people's emotions to get the sound clip to go use in a political ad. And After a while, I gave some bits about, hey, I'm pro-gun. This wouldn't have happened if we were allowed to defend ourselves.
Well, did you have a gun?
That ever got aired.
Did you have a gun at the time?
Not at school. I did it back here at home, but not at school.
Why didn't you have one at school?
It's gun-free zone, and I'd have to store it in my dorm room, and those get searched, and word would get out. I mean, there was no way you could have a gun there without being kicked out of school, and so we were limited because I follow the rules, compared to this guy who obviously doesn't.
It's odd you say that because Colorado has a concealed carry law, a shall issue law. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court when the University of Colorado didn't want kids like you to be able to defend yourself. And the ruling was, no, it's very obvious what the law is. You have to allow them to do that.
Right.
Now that's going to change. What people don't get is that we had what's known as a preemption law. In Colorado, the state did the laws. So we know if you love the law, if you hate the law, you know it's the governor, and you know it's the senators and state reps that make those laws.
Right.
Now our legislature has gotten very wise because last time they did strict gun control, limited magazines to 15 rounds, which is completely arbitrary, and has now made dozens of guns effectively illegal in the state, even though they promised we're not outlawing any guns.
Right.
It's like, well, you're not outlawing that, you're outlawing what makes that work, so you are outlawing that.
That's exactly it.
They knew it and they lied. And I've got a list of, like 24 models of guns that are just common everyday guns that you cannot get in Colorado because the manufacturer does not make a 15-round magazine for it.
That's right.
And after that silliness, recalls happened. 3 sitting senators lost their seats, 2 to a recall, 1 to the threat of a recall. And they learned, we're not touching this again. So they came up with a really brilliant idea, and that was to get rid of the preemption law. So now anti-gun towns and cities can pass their own laws and make this patchwork of laws. And we're seeing it in liberal city after liberal city where they're coming after gun owners in different ways. So if you went to CU, you could have protected yourself. CSU have, ever since concealed carry, allowed concealed carry on their campus, never had a single incident. Dave Kopel, a Second Amendment researcher and lawyer, looked at Colorado statistics and found out that people who have concealed carry permits are 40 times more law-abiding than the average Colorado citizen.
Right.
In other words, these are not the people you need to worry about. These are not the people who are a problem. These are the people who you want to be around when something goes down. And now they're not allowed. Now cities like Boulder and Edgewater and others are taking away people's right to defend themselves. So you're a kid, this happens. What does it do to you, first of all, emotionally and then politically?
Well, emotionally, I mean, it makes you more aware. After a few hours, we all met in a church on our campus, and a door closed a little loudly, and every kid in there, including myself, jumped out of our seats because it sounded like a gunshot to us. You are so aware of what's going on. But to me, what it did to me was, I will not be somebody who's a victim. I will defend myself, and I was already a gun owner, but I will defend myself, I'll defend my family, I'll defend my home, and I'm going to utilize a right given to me by the Constitution and by God in order to defend myself. And so, I started carrying, I trained a lot more, I expanded my arsenal so that I could be able to defend my family, myself, and the things that I love. Other people, it sent them the other way. They became so scared of firearms that what they didn't realize that there were so many people on that campus that could have been carrying, who would have been extremely safe to carry, who could have prevented a shooting like this. In just my class that I was in right before the shooting, there were 2 retired Navy SEALs that were there. I would have loved to have those guys carry on campus. Now, maybe they weren't in the right place at the right time, but there were retired Marines, there were retired police officers. There was a lot of people at that school, even if not just concealed carry holders, but there were a lot of people at that school who could have carried, who would have been extremely safe and made our school much, much more protected. But instead, we were a soft target.
It's amazing the stories that come out, just like yours. Kimberly Corbin, who's a friend of mine, who was viciously raped in college because she wasn't allowed to have a gun with her for the same reason, has become just an outspoken proponent of being able to protect yourselves, particularly women, on campus. And I'm trying to deal with this. Now, you should know I used to be a gun phobe. I hated guns. I had an emotional reaction. A gun was a swastika. A gun was a thing of hate. A gun was something that was magical. It had free will, apparently. And it really took years for me to challenge that. And with the help of my older brother, who kind of went through the same transformation, I became a gun owner. But it took 2 years of really challenging my own biases. And it was not an easy transformation. And once the emotion melts, it's really hard. It's impossible to be anti-gun once you do that. Then the shooting at my King Soopers happened. Very similar to you. You're someone who was killed there. My daughter was supposed to be there. So unfortunately, she wasn't. Our babysitter was trying to get in as everybody else was running out, and she didn't know what was going on. It also had a little sticker on the door. Now, 9% of all Colorado adults have a concealed weapons permit. 9%. Imagine if 9% of those people in that store, if there were 50 people, customers in that store at that time, and that there were 4 of them or 5 of them carrying a gun, that siege that lasted the better part of an hour would have been put down, and people's lives would be saved. Instead, Boulder has now passed an ordinance banning concealed carry in grocery stores. I think of what happened in the New Hope Church down in Colorado Springs, where a parishioner carrying a gun stopped a mass shooter. Boulder's ordinance says you can't have concealed carry in churches, mosques, and temples. I remember the shooting at the Aurora theaters, and Boulder's ordinance now says you can't have concealed weapons in a movie theater. So in every place, campuses, grocery stores, theaters, houses of worship, every place where you need a gun for self-protection and to put down a potential mass shooter, these people are saying you have to be lambs to the slaughter.
Right.
And I don't quite get it.
Well, and I think what you said is exactly right. It's an emotional response, right? They hear that there was a shooting and they think, okay, if a gun wasn't there, that shooting wouldn't have happened. The part that's missing is the logic that says you're asking someone who's dead set on committing murder to follow the law. They've already decided to break the law. They don't care if there's a sticker. They don't care if there's a rule. They don't care if there's whatever. They are already going to commit a crime, which is murder. What's a weapons charge? And so the real part here is you have people, good people, those 9% of Coloradans who said, I'm going to make sure that my family, the people around me, myself, are protected. But they're going to stop going to places where they're not allowed to carry. I've made decisions of where they're not going to go. Or
you're going to go and you're going to carry and you're just not going to tell anyone.
Right, and people can make that decision. Are you a law-abiding citizen or are you a responsible gun owner? In Colorado, it's getting more and more difficult to be both.
Right, and so what you're doing is you're taking those people who statistically are 40 times, not percent, 40 times more law-abiding than the average Coloradan, and you're turning them into lawbreakers with a stroke of the pen just because they want to stop shootings. Like what happened in Westminster when a hero did it. What happened in Colorado Springs when a hero did it. What happened recently in Minnesota, where
in Indiana.
Where someone like you stopped the situation and saved countless lives.
Right.
So, what's terrible about this? These people who are acting emotionally, and I get it. I was them. I get it. But when the next shooting happens, will they be held personally responsible? At some point, those people are going to be sued. Those cities are going to be sued.
Right.
because even if you don't like guns, people are starting to come to the realization the only way we're going to stop school shootings is by having armed staff or armed police presence in numbers, because when seconds count, the police are only minutes away.
Right.
And even, I mean, it's inevitable that we're going to be moving to this new model. The thing that I couldn't get my head around when I was anti-gun was just how the unicorns are going to take all the guns out of America. Mm-hmm. That, I get it. What we'll do is we'll just outlaw these bad things as if they disappear. We have 400 million guns in this country. It is a gun culture. People like me will not give up our guns. I don't care what the law is. That's not going to happen. And so they're not going away. So how do you realistically deal with it? Mm-hmm. So what brought this experience where you were to the Colorado State Shooting Association?
So I was reached out. They had a total revamp of the board. I was reached out to by the president, John Seville. He knew my background. He knew that I was a school shooting survivor, and he said, "Hey, we have a spot open with us. Would love to have you on board. We want to make sure that we're responding to these things from a place of someone who's there." When a school shooting happens or a mass shooting happens, the response on both sides is immediately to go to the extremes and say, gun laws would have stopped this, or it was because of gun laws that this was caused. At our organization, we don't comment on a shooting immediately after it happens. The closest we get is saying we're here to support and to love those that are there. Because the part that I hated was the reporters, before I even knew which of my classmates was killed, was asking me about Republican gun control laws. And that was the part where I was so frustrated that we were having a political conversation when we were counting friends. And so I wanted to take that experience of making sure that, as someone who is very pro-gun, very pro-Second Amendment, and a gun owner, I want to make sure that when we respond out of love and out of concern for those who are actually affected by these things. Because it hurts. I mean, it took me a long time to process what I went through. And it wasn't even in my building. It was at my school, but it took me a long time to process that.
It was the same thing when it happened in my King Soopers. Mm-hmm. And I go there a couple times a week. Mm-hmm. My family goes there. I mean, my friends go there. My neighbors go there. Mm-hmm. And when it happened, it really shook me to the core. Mm-hmm. And I had to step back and go, am I really thinking about this the right way? Mm-hmm. Because when it happened, my feeling was, John, maybe you're wrong on this issue. Mm-hmm. Maybe you're wrong fighting for gun rights. Maybe you're wrong supporting the Second Amendment the way you do. And I had to take a couple days and reevaluate and go right back and challenge my biases again. And that's not an easy thing to do. When I did it, it brought me back to the same conclusion. Mm-hmm. It was more of an uncomfortable conclusion because it's more real.
Right.
It is much more real. When one of the
it's
employees,
in your backyard.
Yeah, when one of the employees was not quite 21, but was planning to get his concealed weapons permit at 21, who was a guy who spent time at the Independence Institute, our organization, and he's no longer here. But if he had a gun, he might be.
Right? It would have given him a chance to fight back. And even with the shooting that happened at King Soopers, we put out a statement pretty closely after, and just saying, hey, right now is not the time for the political fight. Right now is the time for a community to come together and to care about those that are affected by this. The families of the victims, those who are hospitalized, those who are hurting, those in their background.
It's funny how in Uvalde, the immediate reaction was, attack gun owners, attack guns, attack guns, attack guns, until we started seeing these horrific videos of cops doing nothing in the hallway, running and then running away from gunshots, spending so much time, some of them had time to go over to the dispenser and get hand sanitizer and wipe their hands because this apparently was not an immediate threat to them. That's inexcusable.
It is.
And the fact that those teachers are in that building and they are there to protect our kids with their bodies and nothing else. Mm-hmm. I think about our friend at the STEM school shooting, John Castillo's son, who was thinking the same thing and sacrificed his life to save others. Mm-hmm. Is that the world we want?
Right.
Where the only way you can defend the people you love and the people you work with and the people you go to school with is to throw your body in front of bullets, that is something truly sick.
It is.
Either that or the unicorns come and take away all the guns.
Right.
And the unicorns are not coming.
That's right. I mean, and it goes back to, even if you have gun confiscation, criminals are not going to turn in their firearms. People who are dead set on committing murder are not going to follow any kind of law. It doesn't make sense for them to. They are already dead set on committing murder, so why would they follow a confiscation law? But after when we come out with these arguments after to say, hey, let's hold off for a second and just let these people heal, the anti-gun leaders, politicians, personalities, they go nuts because that's their time to capitalize.
Right.
Stephen Colbert took our statement and said, well, how dare you say it's not the time to have this conversation? How many more people have to die? And he turned up the heat to the point where my wife and I were getting death threats because I wrote the statement. As a school shooting survivor, I wrote the statement about why we should hold off on debating guns and let people heal.
So the people who want to, quote, save lives by taking away our Second Amendment rights were giving you death threats.
One even told me that he was going to come to our church and shoot us. And I reported him to the police, and they talked to him, and I told my pastor, it's like, hey, do you want us to stay home this weekend? We can watch on Zoom or whatever. And he goes, no, I'm just going to tell our security team to beef up and be ready. And we were there, and there were no issues. But to me, anyone who's going to turn up the heat, turn up the divisiveness right after a shooting, they're not there for a solution. They're there to get views or votes or donations.
To persuade.
Or right.
They're there to use the crisis to jump on people's understandable emotions.
Right. I mean, you ask somebody, hey, you want to stop school shootings? Absolutely. Anyone who says no to that is a monster. But then they immediately say, well, we have to take away all guns. And they do it right when there's these shootings that occur to try to capitalize on that emotional argument. And that's one of the reasons I'm so open with my story. And I'm so open about the fear that I felt and the decisions I was making. Because if we take away the emotional arguments that they've been using to try to take away firearms, to try to put in more gun legislation and regulations, then all of a sudden we start getting to the facts. And the facts are where more law-abiding citizens are allowed to carry, are allowed to exercise their Second Amendment rights, you have lower crime rates, you have lower incidences of these kinds of shootings, you see crimes being prevented. I mean, even the CDC says there's over 1.5 million defensive uses of firearms a year.
And economist John Lott will put that at many-fold that just by brandishing a weapon. All right, let's leave it at this, though. For me, the positive part is that the traditional voices of gun rights have been awful. They're old guys with baseball caps, wearing camouflage, screaming, out of my cold dead hands. And by the way, that kind of works for me because I'm already convinced I'm part of the choir. But to see young guys like you pick up the mantle, to see women now being the largest segment of getting concealed weapons permits and buying handguns and going through the training, that gives me hope that it kind of reminds me of the gay and lesbian movement. I'm old enough to remember when, if you're in the closet, you were in the closet and you stayed. And then when it started to change, you go, what, I mean, Bob's gay? My cousin, what? Yeah, oh yeah, I guess so. And it changes how you feel on the whole issue. When you find out Susie carries a gun, but she seemed like such a nice, reasonable person before that.
Right.
I think we're seeing that, and we're seeing a lot of moms and a lot of people demand that they protect our kids.
Right.
Talk about moms demanding action. Well, moms do need to demand action and demand that there are armed personnel in schools to protect their kids.
That's exactly
because you know what? Sooner or later, when these things happen, and a school district has decided not to have armed staff, there will be lawsuits because it could have been stopped, and those policymakers are the ones who killed those kids because they didn't protect them.
Well, I have teachers in my family. My mom's a teacher. She homeschooled us up until high school, and then she went and still teaches at the public school system. And she's an incredible shot. She is phenomenal at shooting. And all she wants to do is be able to love on her kids. But part of that right now means she has to be able to defend her kids.
Right.
And you're asking my mom, you said, I'm not intimidating. She's a sweet lady.
All moms are intimidating.
That's right. But she doesn't have the tools. She's not allowed to have the tools to defend her kids in her classroom. And that's the part that breaks my heart. is we're asking people, like you said, we're asking people to lay down their lives without even the tools to defend themselves, to properly defend the people in their classroom.
People want to get more information on the Colorado State Shooting Association.
Yep, so you can go to CSSA.org. Would love to have
CSSA.org. You must have gotten that early because there are no more four-digit.
Yes, well, we've been around since 1924, so we're an older organization. And
you must be the youngest president ever.
Our board's average age is actually 31.
You're kidding me.
So we're full of young people. Our fastest growing groups are minorities, women, and young people in our organization.
That gives me some hope.
Yep, there's a lot of people that love freedom.
And I'm naturally pessimistic.
Well, I'm here to give you hope. But yeah, go to CSSA.org. It's a great place to get connected, get plugged in with us. And we're here to fight for everyone's rights and to make sure everyone has equal opportunity to get trained and able to defend themselves in this state.
Dan, thanks so much for sharing the story. It's important.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.